Thank you very much once again for having me here at Southwest Mental Health, and thank you to every one of you for your interest in this particular topic. Before I begin my presentation, it is important to keep in mind that when I am speaking about the culture of poverty, it is not defined by socioeconomic status. That is very important. There is a lot of work that's been done on the culture of poverty, but they tend to gravitate toward defining it from the standpoint of socioeconomic status. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind is that all of my work has been in Hispanic mental health, in the rural areas of South Texas, the border, and things of that nature with the Spanish-speaking communities. So the examples that I may be using may be more Hispanic-oriented, but when I am speaking about the culture of poverty, it is also not defined by ethnicity. The same things that you see in the lower socioeconomic status, you will also find among the middle class. I work at UTSA part-time, and I see some of the same behaviors in these bright middle-class students that I see in some of our students, detainees at Juvenile Detention Center. I became very interested in the culture of poverty due to my work, primarily working with the indigent. And I began to ask myself, why is it that some children living in dire circumstances in poverty are able to rise above their poverty? And why is it that some students or children who have all of the resources available to them do not seem to grow very much, or as one would expect, to become great leaders and things of that nature? One of the stories that I shared with some of the Hispanic children at juvenile detention was the first Mexican astronaut in space, and the fact that he could talk to children in Mexico in their own language and things of that nature. And when I read to them the story that this is a boy who grew up with his parents in the fields of California, they were amazed to understand that someone just like them could strive to reach the stars and look at the planets and things of that nature. And so when I'm speaking of the culture of poverty, keep in mind that it is more a state of thinking as opposed to a state of being. I've been reading a lot on the culture of poverty, and one of the most interesting articles that I read is writings by Oscar Lewis, for those of you who are familiar with him. And he spoke extensively about the culture of poverty, and he even did some research in Mexico, within the slums in Mexico. But he began to see certain things occurring in these communities. And so what I have done is I've taken these 4 factors that he tended to write about, and I am using them and applying them to my work as a social worker. Okay. And these 4 factors seem to present themselves consistently when working with someone who is going through this thinking, this culture of poverty. Marginality, helplessness, dependency, and inferiority. And that's how I'm defining the culture of poverty. Again, we're not talking about socioeconomic status or anything like that. One thing is true, however, that socioeconomic status does, if an individual is living in lower socioeconomic status, in poverty, then we already know that whatever problem that they are experiencing is going to be magnified by the quality of life that they are living in their communities. Okay. Now, the culture of poverty, when we look at marginality, one of the first things that we begin to notice about marginality is not fitting in. Many of our children feel that they don't fit in. One of the interesting things, or one of the ongoing things that happens with many of the children that we work with, is that they tend to be very nomadic. Their families live very nomadic lives. When I was this fresh out of graduate school social worker, we used to call them the Medicaid children, or the Medicaid families, because we'd go visit them, and then the next time they weren't there, the house was empty. And so we had to call Medicaid and say, where is the Medicaid card going to, so that we can continue with services for them. And we called them the Medicaid families because the only way we knew where they were living was to call Medicaid. I don't think you can do that anymore, though. Anyway, so not fitting in. Already we know that as children are developing their social skills and things of that nature, they need a lot of stability in their lives. But because they are constantly moving from place to place, they do not get a chance to develop those valuable social skills. In essence, they feel like they're always having to start over. Many times, they feel like they don't fit in. There was a I presented a similar talk last year at the first San Antonio Youth Summit. And so we got all of these high school students from San Antonio, and they came together at the municipal auditorium for talks and things of that nature. And one of the school counselors came up to me, and she told me that as they were driving up in the bus, and she was bringing her students from one of the more impoverished parts of the city, that as the bus was pulling up, and the children began to see students from north side schools, and they were very well dressed, and they just seemed much brighter than they were, they began to feel nervous. And they began to tell their counselor, "Counselor, I don't think we belong here. We feel like we don't fit in," they began to say. The very same things that these kids were seeing were some of the very same things that we continue to see in working with some of the children. The feeling of not fitting in, this feeling of marginality. We especially see these types of behaviors among our children involved in gangs and things like that. The interesting thing about marginality is that it's almost this self-defeating behavior because they feel that they don't fit in, so they reject the norm, they reject society. And so society in turn rejects them because of their behaviors. And so this going back and forth that contributes to marginality and the not fitting in. The other thing that we see in some of our individuals experiencing this is this competing for basic needs. And some of the very basic needs that they compete for at Juvenile Detention Center, for example, is cookies. Or even the attention of the mod leader. The guards are called mod leaders there. Even the attention of the guard to see, can I get an extra benefit? Can I just stay up a little bit longer? Can I stay outside in the Bay Area as opposed to going into my cell, kind of things. And they compete against each other or amongst each other. One of the biggest behaviors that we see is this ingratiating types of behavior, this overly friendliness types of behaviors. And the idea is that if I can make you my friend, then I can perhaps win a few benefits and things of that nature, or a bit more privileges and things of that nature. We see the same behaviors out in the community, competing for whatever benefits may be available in the neighborhood and things like that. One of the biggest things that we see is this perceptions of being oppressed by those in power or authority. And we see this a lot at juvenile detention. I also saw this at UTSA as well. And we see this, for example, at UTSA, I had this young man who came in, and he said, "I just feel like I don't belong here at UTSA." And I asked him, "Why is it that you feel like you don't belong here?" "Well, because everyone is different, more different than I am. Everyone seems brighter, everyone seems taller, everyone seems to know where they're going in life," and things like that. And so no matter how much you made him aware of all of the things that were required to get into university, he still couldn't find himself fitting in. And one of the biggest things that he saw was this imbalance in power. Studies have shown that children who feel powerless in their surrounding world will not perform as well as those children who feel like they have some sort of power in what goes on in their lives. We've also seen that children who feel that their locus of control or that what happens in their life is controlled outside of them will also go through these feelings of being oppressed, and that the powers that be will determine my fate in my life and things like that. We see this a lot at juvenile detention. We asked the children two things as part of the assessment that we do is, number one, what would you like to accomplish while you are here with us? Many of them say, to get out, okay? But when I ask them questions such as, what would you like to do with your life? Whatever happens, happens, sir. Whatever happens, happens. And they live their days, they live their lives day to day. Whatever happens, happens, sir. Whatever happens, happens. Okay. And so one of the things that we're trying to do there is change that thinking, to make them aware that if you take charge of your life, good things can also happen if you take charge of your life. Let me back up a little and say a little bit more about culture. When I'm talking about culture here, also keep in mind that it's pervasive. That culture runs in families. It's not something you wake up doing one morning. Culture is actually all those things you've been taught to do. It is the lenses by which we look at society, how we fit in society, and all of those things. But those lenses that we wear are put there by the family's life experiences. We already know that children who have low self-esteem will more than likely have their parents also with low self-esteem. And when I used to work in the school, we would see that children who were poor readers also had parents who were poor readers. And so that culture of literacy or illiteracy continues. San Antonio has a huge problem with teen pregnancy. It is the culture of San Antonio and of particular parts of San Antonio that this culture continues to be pervasive. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. Okay. So the first thing that we see in some of our children experiencing a culture of poverty is the marginality, the not fitting in. One of the studies that I read was that as children hit high school and then into the middle parts of high school, they began to become much more aware of ethnic differences. And they began to sort of seek out those groups that fit into the perception of their own ethnicity. When I presented this particular talk to a group of teachers, they made me aware that they are seeing this type of behavior at a much younger age, in the middle school age actually. And it seems to fit. Many kids that we get at juvenile detention are coming from middle school. And for the mental health professionals in the room, we know that the psychological need to belong is greatest, it's strongest in the middle school ages. This is where children are going to seek out those groups that reflect their family culture, their family upbringing. Children who come from dysfunctional families will seek out other children who think and live the same way that they do. Why? Because now I don't feel as abnormal. Now I fit in. And as a group together, we're going to go on the school campus and we're going to terrorize those whom we can't fit in with and things like that. Okay. We got a young girl at juvenile detention 2 weeks ago, and she's one of the children whose mother said, we're moving out of the neighborhood, we're going to move to a better neighborhood so that we can have a better life. And so they moved to a better neighborhood, trying to get a better life, but the little girl felt like she did not fit in. She felt that everybody looked at her because of the way that she dressed, because of the way that she talked and where she came from, and all of these examples of how she was different were being given to her. And so she began to reject the normal things that happened in that school. Okay? And the more she rejected, the more she was rejected herself.